Hello everyone, my name is Josh and this is Swim School Industry Musings, and today I'm going to give you a review for a film I watched called Men, which came out in 2022, and it stars Jessie, Buckley and Rory Kinnear. And Men, for people who don't know what it's about, if you haven't heard of this film, there's probably a reason for it, but if you have heard of this film, you've probably seen a poster for it, or you've seen a trailer. I've done both. I've been able to see both a trailer and a poster for this film. I usually volunteer at the libraries, so whenever I come home, I usually walk past a tram stop, and on one of the tram stops is an advertisement for this film. And or it used to be before it went off to cinemas, and then I saw a trailer for it where Jessie Buckley's character goes into a pub and she sees every man that she talks to has the same face as Rory Kinnear. And this film was actually kind of interesting. It was one of the films that I really wanted to see because I wanted to know why she was being haunted by a guy who has a very similar face. Every single time she meets a guy, it's this man's face. I wanted to know what that was all about, so I basically didn't hear about this film for a good long while until it showed up on Amazon Prime. So I decided to give it a watch after basically debating with myself, okay, do I actually want to watch this? Does this feel like something that I'd actually want to watch? And after having watched it, it is an interesting movie. I definitely do think it's a great example of Alex Garland's ability to basically create these very striking films that really do sit with you, and they're one of the things that I really do love about his work so far. For those of you who don't know, Alex Garland is a novelist, or he was a novelist, and now he's going into motion pictures. One of his most famous works is Ex Machina, and which is a film of Oscar Isaac about artificial intelligence and humanity's relationship with artificial intelligence. And another film that he did was a film called Annihilation, starring Natalie Portman. And he is quite a good director, but I do feel like usually when you are a novelist and you're trying to break into directing or writing films, it can tend to be a very difficult transition, because writing a novel and writing a screenplay are two completely different mediums, and of course directing a film, you have much more of a hands-on approach to your storytelling device. It's kind of like being an author, but except you kind of also have to organise all these different things, whereas when you're a novelist, you have completely and utterly creative control, but you also have the restrictions of having to answer to producers, executive producers, and trying to basically get your vision out there without having to incur the wrath of the editing machine. So, or the censorship machine. And I think that's something that really is quite a very difficult thing to deal with. So I am actually quite happy for Alex Garland for making that leap. But it's one of those things that you have to have a very specific talent for storytelling in order to make that leap. And I think Men is a very interesting film. It has an interesting idea at the heart of it. The film basically follows a woman played by Jessie Buckley. Her name is Harper, and she is, when we first meet her, she is basically on her way to a small village named Cotson, which is sort of like in the northwest of England, and she is trying to settle down in a new life. She's in this big manor house, which is overseen and looked after by Geoffrey, played by Rory Kinnear. And he seems to be a guy of a very specific type. Like, say, for example, when she first meets him, he goes to her, oh, well, you seem like you have a lot of bags, so I'll go and get them for you. And she goes, oh, do you want me to help you? And he goes, no, you just stay there, it's fine, it's always a man's job to go and get the stuff. And I thought that's a very weird thing to say. And if you want to look for a specific image, he has kind of like these long protruding teeth. If you want to think of him in terms of voice, he kind of has a voice very similar to Tim Nice but Dim in Harry Enfield and Friends. You know, that type of character who goes, oh yes, jolly good, yes, I'm very, posh and very British, and I'm very nice but dim, very good style, like that kind of voice. He has that kind of feel to him. And I couldn't help but laugh, but Rory Kinnear was fantastic as this character. Like, I really do love how he's able to give this impression that he's meant to be a friendly guy, but there's also that element of darkness in him. Like, you can just really tell that there's even a moment where he comments on her, like, oh, you were picking apples earlier out there on the apple tree. That's not very good, scrumping for apples. That's the forbidden fruit, you know. And Jessie Buckley's character goes, "Oh, sorry, I did that." And he just goes, "I'm joking." And he gives this little smile that's like, oh, it's not the type of smile that makes you think to yourself, oh, this guy's a very charming dude, or this guy's a very happy dude. This is the kind of smile that makes you instantly afraid of the guy. Like, you're kind of thinking to yourself, this is a guy who has pervert or rapist tattooed all over his face. Like, he's one of those men who you just think, oh, he gives me very uncomfortable vibes right away. And it's really horrible, but because I'm sure he's a very nice guy, but you're kind of thinking to yourself, oh no, Geoffrey's bad news. But that element just really kind of made me laugh. But it's stuff like that really makes you think he's a specific type of person, or a specific type of man that, you know, you just need to stay away from. And Harper comments as much when she's talking to her friend on the phone, and she's talking about this new house. And the house is actually really nice. It has a sitting room, it has a kitchen, a very wide kitchen, and it has, you know, a sitting room. It has various different rooms in the house. And it's really actually very nice. It's very comfortable. And she's only staying there for 2 weeks. And I literally said to myself, I'd stay there for a whole year. Like, I wouldn't want to go home if I stayed somewhere like that. Obviously, the house would have to be disabled accessible, but I'd absolutely be in my element there. And yeah, I think it's great. And as she starts to have a look around, she starts to get acquainted with the house, she decides to have a good look around. And one of the places that she ends up going to is a tunnel, like a very dark tunnel in the middle of nowhere. And it's during this particular sequence where she starts to play with the echo, that she starts to go, ha ha, and things like that. And it echoes back to her, and she goes, ha 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 ha, and it just echoes. And then she sees at the very end of the tunnel someone's watching her, and she looks down and she peers down the tunnel to who it could possibly be, and then he begins to chase her. He begins to like run towards her, and as soon as that happens, you're like, oh my god, you should just run, because this thing is really horrible. But what's really interesting is you don't really know what it is that's happening, because for the majority of the time you're kind of thinking to yourself, is this just something that's wrong with her? Is she just kind of, you know, very anxious about being around men? And she kind of, like I said, she refers to Geoffrey as a specific type of man that she, you know, encountered and you need to stay away from, kind of thing. Is that what she's seeing? Because when she starts to see different people who has Rory Kinnear's face, she doesn't really have that much of a reaction to seeing his face on, say, for example, a 10-year-old boy, or his face on on a male bartender in the local pub or something like that. She doesn't really have that much of a reaction to it. I'm thinking to myself, if I saw the same face over and over and over again on various different guys that I meet throughout the village, I wouldn't be thinking to myself, oh, I can just have a normal conversation with this guy. I'd be thinking to myself, oh, you either have an initial reaction, which is, oh, you look like someone I know, or you look very familiar to me. Or you could just think, this is too friggin' weird, like this guy is just basically he's either having me on, or this is something else, something more supernatural going on. But then when I kind of started to realise when she started to go into the pub and she didn't react to the two men who have the same face. And I thought, oh, this clearly isn't meant to be set in any kind of a reality. This is clearly meant to be taking place inside one character's head. And what I think is very interesting about this film is it's one of those films where you have to watch it multiple times in order to get what's actually going on. And it definitely isn't going to be for everyone. It definitely is going to be one of those people that either when you are introduced to the main concept of this woman being harassed by a guy with a very similar face, or these men with the same sort of face, you're either going to be with it or you're going to be totally confused and therefore want to check out of it. But I think it's a film that people should at least give a try to watch at least once, because there is stuff there that I think is really interesting. Like there's the theme of, you know, trying to overcome trauma and trying to, you know, pick yourself up after a very traumatic incident, because Harper, Jessie Buckley's character, is someone who's trying to run away from a particularly traumatizing past. She had a boyfriend named James who, from what we know of the relationship, it seems to be that she is dealing with some kind of emotional abuse from him, because he tends to be very short with her and very easily prone to aggression very quickly, and it tends to put her very much um on an uneasy streak. And when she's talking to her friend Riley, she messages her and says, he's really scaring me right now. Like, what's wrong with him? And he starts to threaten her with suicide. Like, he starts to say, he's going to kill himself, and when he does, it's going to be all your fault, and that's going to be on your conscience. And she goes, don't threaten me with suicide. Like, I'm still going to divorce you because I don't feel like I'm unhappy with you. I don't feel like I'm happy with you, and I want a divorce because I feel like this can't go on. This isn't healthy. And he goes, well, keep going, keep doing what you're doing, and my death will be on your conscience, kind of thing. And it's really horrible to think about, because she clearly loves James, and you can clearly tell that she really did care about him. But when he started, pulling the suicide card, it kind of felt like, she was being pressured into staying with him, even though she didn't feel like it was a good move at that time. And it's really horrible, because you can really tell there's more depth to their relationship than what's originally being presented. It isn't just simply a case of him being an abusive spouse and her being the victim. There is clearly a little bit more of a deeper dynamic there, and I'm actually quite curious. To go back and rewatch it, because there are certain things in there that make me think, oh, that's actually kind of a very bizarre reaction that she gave to that comment that he made, or there's a very particular thing that made me wonder, oh, maybe she has some issues that we're not fully seeing there. So there's a lot to take in there, I think. But I think it's very interesting, and it's very well shot, especially, but the performances are very well done, especially Jessie Buckley, who absolutely kills it as Harper, as this character who is essentially going through depression. She's going through this really horrible phase where she literally can't let go, and she can't let go of this horrible incident. I don't really call it depression, it's more PTSD in many ways. Like, she clearly, has a very traumatic relationship with her past, and she really, is trying to deal with the fact that she has lost someone that she loves, but she kind of also knows that he wasn't a good person. He was someone who was actually trying to use her and try to basically, use her as sort of like a coping mechanism for his own issues. And I really do like the fact that she does acknowledge that she is in a bad place, and she is trying to move on. She's trying to move on with her life. She's trying to, have a little bit of time to herself after this traumatic incident. But then she meets the Reverend at the church. And one of the things that I really do like about this exchange is it just shows right off the bat. A lot of people might say that the actor Rory Kinnear being on the face of every man in the village is a very weird choice. But I think because she's in a village, and she says the throwaway line, Geoffrey was a particular type of man, it really gives you this impression that every man in the village kind of has some degree of darkness in them. There's some degree of insidious intent with the way he behaves, or the way he conducts himself with Jessie Buckley's character as she's going through this journey of trying to heal. And there's this really horrible exchange with the Reverend where she's basically pouring her heart out to this guy and saying, I knew this something was going wrong with my husband, and we were unhappy for months, so I tried to divorce him. But then he tried to, we had a fight, and, I threw him out, and eventually he tried to go upstairs to the other flat, and he ended up, climbing down. He wanted to climb down to our flat, like the garden area of our flat, but then he ended up falling, and, falling to his death, sadly, in a very grisly scene. And she starts to cry, and she starts to feel very upset, and the Reverend goes, well, it seems like you wanted to be understood. And have you ever considered the possibility that when he hit you, did you give him an opportunity to apologise? And that's when you really start to realise that there's something going on here. Like, this isn't just simply a case of, this is just some guy who's willing to provide safe counsel to this woman. This is a guy who clearly is trying to put ideas into her head and make her feel shit about the decisions that she made. And it's a really horrible scene, and it's really kind of horrible to watch her kind of, you know, try to defend herself, or, you know, for basically just doing something that every person would do if they ever find themselves trapped in a relationship that they don't feel happy in anymore, which is that she made a decision to divorce him. She didn't need to, but she had to, because, you know, he was obviously, you know, not very well, not very healthy. And it's really upsetting to watch. So she basically just says what I would have said in that moment, and she tells him to go fuck himself. And I absolutely just think that's incredible. And I absolutely think that this film does a very good job of really showing that the world can be a very messed up place sometimes, and it really is kind of weird to kind of see that this guy is a misogynist. He is a guy who clearly thinks that, you know, women shouldn't do too much heavy lifting or anything like that. And she clearly, you know, wants independence. She wants to be free. Like, say, for example, when Geoffrey is showing her around the house, he refers to her as Mrs. Marlowe, because her surname's Marlowe. So he clearly kind of refers to her as Mrs. Marlowe. And he goes, "Where's your husband?" And he immediately assumes that she's married, or that she had, you know, a relationship with someone. Like, she could very easily be a lesbian or something like that, like, for all he knows. And it just kind of makes you think, like, why is he assuming that she's, you know, married? And it just kind of feels like a very bizarre thing. And she just basically writes it off as, "Oh, I forgot to, you know, change the name after, you know, my husband died," and things like that. And it's just little things like that that really add a certain layer of suspense. This isn't a drama, though. Even though I have been pitching it as a bit of a drama, it is more of an atmospheric horror than anything else. Because when there's a scene where where a guy who is smothered in earth and scratches and twigs, and who is bald, starts to follow her, he begins to get into her house, and particularly into her garden, and just wander around. He's completely naked, and this guy has scratches all over him. He's covered with earth, and he just basically is wandering around, and he's after her. We don't know why he's after her, but he is. And there's something about him that just really kind of exudes this kind of almost supernatural quality to him. And it's very weird, because you don't really quite know what he is exactly, but you know that he's somehow a construct in her head of this kind of old-fashioned misogyny. And that's essentially what this film is. It's basically trying to be a critique on misogyny. It's a critique on gender dynamics, and it's a critique of a very old-fashioned law in, you know, gender, which is, you know, the idea that, you know, men and women are different genders, but they're not always treated equally among different people, especially in regards to men's relationship to women. And that's something that has been kind of, you know, tried and tested throughout a lot of the years, and a lot of people have, you know, given various different points of view. But it is framed like a folk tale. It is framed like a, you know, Brothers Grimm style fairy tale, or a Hans Christian Andersen tale, where it is about feminism, because fairy tales were founded on feminism. They were told by elderly spinster women to the local children, and a lot of the time with fairy tales, they often had a degree of a moral to a lot of their stories, like don't talk to strangers, don't, you know, don't pick up things that you don't know about, and of course, you know, bring them back home, because they could be dangerous, they could be, you know, they could lead to a lot of trouble. There's all sorts of stories. There's also stories regarding, you know, sex before marriage and things like that, and all these other things. So you really do get this degree that there is an old-fashioned veneer about the fable. And of course, incorporating that into a story like this film Men, it really is an interesting idea. And I think Alex Garland just needs a pat on the back just for trying to give this a shot, like give a modern day context to the fairy tale fable, because it is a feminist it is a very, you know, traditionally feminist archetypal construct, the fable. I mean, it was founded by, you know, spinster women who, you know, would tell these stories to the local children to incorporate morals and ideas. And of course, the fairy tale was kind of rejuvenated back in the 70s and the 60s, 70s, and 80s through the works of Angela Carter, who did stories like The Bloody Chamber and The Magic Toy Shop and all these other great novels and all these other great works. So there clearly is a influence on the fairy tale with this film, but it is a very difficult watch because it is very abstract in a lot of areas, and there are a lot of very surreal scenes, including a scene where a man gives birth. And I know a lot of people would say, how the hell can that happen? But honestly, it's something which needs to be seen. Even if you don't see the film, you need to just type in that scene where the guy gives birth, and it's like, oh God. And it's just going to keep going. It's just going to keep going. And there's a little bit of symbolism in that too, because I feel like the film is basically about a character being reborn, a character kind of, overcoming trauma and being reborn. One of the key symbolic references for rebirth is fire. And one of the things that, is commonly constructed, like say, for example, in Game of Thrones, when Daenerys Targaryen is going into the fire after she is burning the witch at the stake, and she's basically burning her husband Khal Drogo's body, she goes into the fire with her dragon eggs, and then she emerges not in ashes but in a fully formed way as herself, being reborn naked with her dragon eggs hatched and her becoming the mother of dragons, Khaleesi. And that's one example of fire being a symbol of rebirth. But also, I think fire is also an example of, sexuality, and it basically is everywhere in mythology, and especially in biblical mythology, with the flames, with the ecstasy of Saint Teresa, which is of course a story about sex, essentially her basically having a sexual awakening through worshipping, through practicing her faith. And that's everywhere in, folklore and fiction. So I think that's one of the key things that, is basically the ultimate symbol of rebirth, which is you going through the flames and coming out the other side. Also, in Tibetan traditions, there's the idea of, people walking through hot coals and, using it to prove their, strength and durability. And of course, a symbol of rebirth, the ultimate symbol of rebirth, is when a woman becomes a mother and they give birth. So it's basically the final transition for women to basically go from being the child, being the, being child, teenager, and now woman and mother eventually. So it kind of is symbolic for, them going through the ultimate fire. And of course, if you have sisters, which I do, they always describe giving birth. My sister described it as really burning when she gave birth to my niece and my nephews and things like that. So I actually find that very interesting, that the symbol of fire is obviously, symbolic of rebirth to me. So, or at least to a lot of people. So yeah, the idea that, the man is literally giving birth to versions of himself is supposed to be, her symbolically fighting the urge to, remain herself, but also trying to, become something new in the process of tackling this challenge, which seems to be this very supernatural being who is taking the shape of one person and trying to harass her and trying to basically yield her to his advances. But she's not going to go down like that, like any strong woman should. She's going to go down fighting, and I'm not going to say what else happens, but yeah, this film was an experience, and it definitely is the more cerebral film I've tackled on this channel, and I do hope people check it out at least once. And I think it's a film that I won't be returning to anytime soon, but I will definitely say it was a film I enjoyed, and I do think a lot of people will enjoy it too, hopefully. And if people, start saying, "Oh, I didn't really enjoy it," well, that's perfectly fine. You're perfectly, entitled to, enjoy whatever films you want. And my question for you guys for the comments is: have you ever seen a film which you altogether enjoyed, but you felt like it was very difficult to watch? Like it had a subject matter that you felt was very, troubling, or it had something that really could have made you think, oh, I'm not really feeling comfortable, but overall I enjoyed what the film was trying to do, kind of thing. I definitely will say Men is up there for me in terms of a film that has a very difficult subject matter. It's very difficult to watch. But I do think I do want to hear your thoughts in the comments. What was a film that you felt was a good film, but you felt like you wouldn't watch it again because the subject matter was too difficult to watch or too very difficult to deal with, or it was tackled in a way which felt too real to you? And this has been Josh with Whimsical and Interesting Musings, and I hope you're all having a very good day, and take care. Bye-bye for now.